Over 90% of Russian drones pushing toward Ukrainian lines are getting smashed out of the sky. Down on the ground near Pokrovsk, armored carriers, logistics trucks, and infantry squads are taking heavy hits the second they enter the kill zone. The tactical reality has completely flipped. Direct frontal clashes aren't the only threat anymore. We are seeing lethal pressure flooding the entire area of operations. From the rear airspace where enemy recon gets swatted down, to the supply routes pushing into staging areas. Even deep artillery and radar positions are stripped of their distance and their cover. Under these conditions, Russian assaults shatter before they even organize, armor burns before dropping troops, and survivors get hunted as they scatter. These aren't random skirmishes. You and I are watching a deliberate chain reaction, taking down drones kills. Situational awareness, early barrages paralyze movement, and relentless follow-ups crush any chance to regroup. Stick with me here. I'm going to show you how just minutes of overhead surveillance completely breaks enemy timing, structure, and command coordination. This brutal pattern is dictating every single phase of the fight. The real question isn't how many troops or armored vehicles commanders can shove forward. It's whether any movement can stay undetected long enough to survive in a war zone where overhead drones see absolutely everything. The first phase of this slaughter happens in the rear airspace. Ukrainian strike drones are already hunting Russian recon birds before ground units even launch. Fresh combat footage shows a Russian recon drone cruising low and steady. It's scanning tree lines, beaming live intel back to base. Through its own lens, the sky looks totally empty. No visible threats. Suddenly, a small interceptor drone breaches the frame's edge. It's keeping its distance. The Ukrainian pilot holds it just outside detection range, perfectly matching the target's speed instead of rushing the kill. The interceptor holds fire. The operator is being patient, waiting for the perfect vector, dialing in altitude and position, slowly analyzing the enemy drone's flight path and overall stability. As the gap closes, the strike drone drifts into a high rear blind spot. The pilot keeps the approach dead smooth. One jerky movement could burn the element of surprise. Right here, timing is everything. If the interceptor burns its thrust too early, the Russian drone might evade. If he waits too long, the target escapes the sector. The call is made in a split second. The interceptor hits the throttle, cuts the distance, and slams head-on into the target, terminating the flight before it sends anything useful. The feed turns to static. From down below, it's just silence. But that one aerial kill just erased coordinates that would have rained artillery on Allied positions. I've got another clip here. A Russian drone tries dodging its route, pulling up like it's taking electronic fire. But a Ukrainian interceptor is already stalking it from a low angle, hugging the terrain to stay ghosted. The pilot creeps it into the pocket, skipping the straight line for tight, tactical micro-corrections, keeping his bird level, reading the enemy's movements, just waiting for the target to level out. The second that flight path locks, the interceptor commits. It surges from below, shredding the recon bird before it can even twitch. The whole strike takes mere seconds. The actual impact is great, but the timing is what wins the war here. These enemy eyes get blinded before they paint targets, before they coordinate artillery drops, and way before they can support armor pushes. Every single kill rewrites the next phase of battle, stripping forward-moving infantry of critical tactical data. The Russian commander's view of the map goes totally dark with every downed drone. From a satellite feed, it just looks like isolated robot dogfights up there. But tactically, this is the frontline layer of pressure that dictates the entire ground war. The sky isn't just an observation deck anymore. It's a brutal choke point where enemy intel gets slaughtered before it ever hits a radio. And that massive intel blackout cripples Russian command decisions before engines even start. When you gouge out the enemy's eyes this early, what happens next is inevitable. Russian ground forces are going to push anyway, but they're marching completely blind into a heavily defended meat grinder. That's exactly why the Pokrovsk sector is so bloody right now. Those approach roads aren't supply lines anymore, they are open kill boxes for blind troops. Let's look at this together. The next offensive phase kicks off the second. A Russian troop carrier hits the edge of that approach zone. Why? Because right there, forward momentum stops being a tactical advantage and instantly becomes a death trap. The armor pushes in hard and fast along a battered Pokrovsk dirt track. It kicks up heavy dust trails, abandoning the rear safety lines and pushing aggressively toward the exact grid coordinate where the infantry squad plans to dismount. Down in the dirt, that quick sprint probably feels like the safest part of the entire frontline push. Speed minimizes exposure, keeping the squad moving before Ukrainian artillery can dial them in. But from an aerial overwatch perspective, the tactical picture changes entirely. A Ukrainian recon drone already has visual lock on that approach vector. It watches the armor close that final gap, confirming the vehicle isn't just passing through the sector. It is moving directly into a pre-planned deployment zone. That is the critical trigger. This target is no longer just a fast-moving blur on a dirt road. It's a heavy transport packed with troops, arriving exactly where those men plan to deploy and form the leading edge of a major Russian assault. The kill shot hits in the brutal seconds between those two tactical phases. As the armored carrier slows down to pivot, the rear troop doors start to unlatch. Inside, the squad prepares to bail out. Suddenly, an FPV strike drone sweeps in low and incredibly fast, holding a dead-steady flight path, while the Ukrainian operator locks its nose squarely onto the center mass of that vehicle. There is absolutely zero wasted motion on this final attack run. The drone pilot doesn't need a second pass. He doesn't circle around waiting for better angles. Because right now, that loaded transport is simultaneously at its most valuable and its most vulnerable. The payload detonates before the infantry can fully dismount, and the devastation is absolutely instant. The carrier is permanently knocked out right where their ground offensive was supposed to actually start. That single catastrophic hit shatters the entire assault rhythm, because the armored convoy trailing behind suddenly realizes they are no longer driving into a planned, secure battlefield entry point. They just see fire, twisted wreckage, choking smoke, and a highly compromised supply route. Surviving troops scramble to bail out fast and push hard away from the kill zone. Other soldiers freeze in pure panic because forward momentum is dead. A few calculate their safest bet is hitting the dirt near the road, while others desperately sprint for the nearest tree line before another kamikaze drone drops out of the sky. What higher command planned as one smooth, coordinated transition into a major combat push instantly disintegrates into scattered, panicked individual survival reactions. Stick with me here. The blast wave hits more than metal. The entire rear formation loses its combat tempo. A trailing transport cannot confidently push forward into the breach when the lead element just got obliterated right at the primary drop coordinate. Follow-on elements face a brutal tactical dilemma. Aggressively punch into that same deadly kill box, or halt, and risk a massive collapse in unit cohesion and command. Every single wasted second multiplies the pressure. That is exactly why neutralizing that lead infantry carrier carries so much strategic weight. We aren't just looking at the combat loss of a single machine. This is the exact moment an organized frontline assault completely fractures, dissolving long before it ever engages the defensive trenches it was supposed to overrun. The approach vector remains. In many cases, the Russian soldiers are still breathing. Their strict orders to advance haven't changed, but the tactical framework supporting that grim command has just suffered a catastrophic, crippling blow. This leaves one massive tactical question hanging over the smoke. With the heavy armor destroyed and the infantry formation completely shattered, where do these stranded survivors run next? And honestly, do they possess any realistic chance to consolidate before the next artillery barrage zeroes in? Obliterating that lead mechanized troop carrier doesn't stop the deadly sequence. Phase 3 immediately shifts to the surviving grunts, desperately scrambling to vanish into the terrain before another Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. Several leap clear and sprint frantically along the jagged treeline edge, while others dive face first into shallow artillery craters, huddle behind sparse brush, or jam themselves into shattered dirt trenches that look barely deep enough to shield a soldier's body from frontal shrapnel. From the ground, that panicked reaction makes perfect sense. That burning chassis is a death trap. The road is totally exposed, and anywhere else feels infinitely better than hugging a smoking armored target. But looking through the drone feed, the reality is far more brutal. That frantic scattering away from the blast zone isn't an escape, it paints a glowing trail. Each terrified soldier picks a different escape vector, yet all remain highly visible targets from the crippled offensive. The overhead FPV operator keeps this chaotic scene framed, showing intense tactical discipline by not rushing the second strike prematurely. You and I know why that patience matters. The primary objective is no longer just eliminating those initial blast survivors. The true high-value play is tracking exactly where these fleeing troops retreat, waiting to see if command elements in the rear attempt to salvage this bloodbath. Stick with me. Minutes later, that tactical answer appears. A supply truck advances from the rear vector, hauling ammo, drone batteries, and fresh gear to sustain their assault phase. The driver isn't rushing. This is not a panicked retreat. Our aerial recon spots it early, but the FPV operator holds off on an immediate kill. Instead, we track the target as it veers off the main road, seeking concealment behind a heavy tree line. That maneuver exposes the real prize. Behind those trees, scattered infantrymen are already rallying from multiple sectors. Several survived the previous armored carrier strike. Others deployed nearby are converging on this exact grid coordinate to re-establish combat order. Down in the mud, that tree line probably feels like a safe zone to regain operational control. The live feed isn't just showing a wrecked transport and stragglers anymore. It reveals a massing troop cluster around a logistics truck, a dead giveaway the enemy is trying to reboot their assault. That is when the operator goes kinetic. An FPV strike drone dives only after the rally point proves its tactical worth. The payload detonates right as ammo, troops, and field command link up into one target. That timing is why the blast radius destroys much more than a single supply truck. Vital artillery shells meant to sustain the Russian push never reach the frontline units. Infantrymen who thought they found a breather get blown back into absolute chaos before re-establishing any combat structure. This follow-on strike doesn't just pile on more damage. It totally strips their chance to fix the first disaster. This sequence is brutal because the drone pilot isn't just blindly hitting the first shape on the monitor. They are reading the battlefield logic, waiting for that perfect window where one warhead cripples multiple military functions instantly. You and I need to look closely here. The first blast caused shock, but this tree-line strike is lethal. At this exact moment, enemy infantry remains totally scattered, logistics are exposed, and the assault has lost its spearhead. But this kill chain doesn't stop here, because miles behind the zero line, heavy support systems remain active, repositioning, and highly vulnerable to this exact style of aerial pursuit. The drone hunt now pushes deeper into the Russian rear guard. Once frontline troops and ammo routes are shattered, the targeting pressure shifts to the high-value assets holding the broader combat zone together. We are tracking one of those assets, a mobile radar unit fleeing down a rear corridor as the front line collapses. It is actively rolling, clearly attempting to relocate its position, minimize drone exposure, or maintain surveillance over a tactical sector that is rapidly falling apart. This radar truck is massive, generating a huge thermal signature that outshines troops hiding in bushes. An interceptor drone dives in for the first hit, but the armor holds. Thick smoke pours out, the rig hits the brakes, but then it actually keeps driving. As this radar system abandons its post, it exposes something way better than a parked truck. It reveals an escape corridor, a fallback heading, and proves this surveillance asset is effectively out of the fight. Our Overwatch drone maintains visual lock, while a second kamikaze is scrambled. The follow-up attack run is totally calculated. The pilot doesn't need to hunt for the target anymore. The radar is already painted. The pilot just trails the smoking chassis as it limps down a dirt path, lines up a devastating rear angle, and slams the drone home for the kill. By that point, the enemy hasn't just lost expensive hardware. That entire grid sector gets blinded exactly when rearguard Russian units desperately need early warning and artillery coordination to survive. We see this identical drone warfare tactic, erasing Russian artillery crews trying to hide in forests. A heavy gun like a 2S-19 or D-30 might be tucked under thick branches, alongside tree trunks, or inside tight clearings where the canopy masks its thermal shape. The first FPV strike doesn't just crash blindly into the center of the howitzer. It sweeps in low, detonating against the branches, stripping away the camouflage netting, and exposing the steel underneath. Then, the second drone gets a wide-open flight path. Once that defensive canopy is shredded, the tactical kill becomes effortless. The operator dials in on the barrel, the breech, or the crew cabin, As you and I can see, one precision hit instantly turns a hidden firing point into burning scrap. Nightfall does not stop the bleeding out here. It accelerates it. After sundown, personnel and armor shifting across sectors light up our thermal optics like flares on a pitch-black runway. Look at the feed with me. What vanishes to ground troops becomes an easy mark from above. The terrain cools down, but idling engines, human bodies, and fresh tread marks glow hot. A supply rig crossing a tree line, an artillery crew repositioning, or crippled armor trying to limp back to base. Every single movement gets tagged the second the sun drops. This shatters the traditional tempo of combat. Nightfall no longer buys anyone a tactical pause. It just shifts the visual spectrum. But listen, the kinetic strike isn't always called in immediately. The onslaught doesn't end with a single blast. We keep the pressure dialed to maximum until the hostile asset is either totally erased or neutralized completely. Once heavy assets like radar arrays and artillery batteries get dragged into this kill chain, the operational reality gets incredibly grim. What happens when the rear guard air defense umbrella gets sucked right into that very same kill zone? The final phase of this strike package is brutal. The hammer doesn't just fall on frontline infantry, transport trucks, radar, or artillery units. It cuts deep into the air defense networks designed to shield the entire rear operational theater. A Panzer battery might be dug in miles back, looking totally isolated from the meat grinder on the zero line. But that feeling of safety is a fatal illusion once the forward defensive lines start collapsing under fire. Rear interceptors are already flying blind. That troop transport near Pokrovsk? We watched it burn before the assault even materialized. Scattered survivors fell right into a secondary ambush when their own supply rig gave away the rally point. The Panzer operators probably think they still control the airspace. Their platform was engineered specifically to lock down other high-value targets, detect incoming threats, and stop the rear sector from becoming a hunting ground for drone swarms. But once we geolocate it, that armor becomes a massive liability. It is not just defending the grid anymore. You and I both know it is now the prime target. This is exactly what escalates the next tactical strike. We are not just trying to scrap a single launcher. The mission is to systematically dismantle the backbone of their rear echelon. This kill chain starts way before the warhead actually detonates. A recon drone establishes a visual lock, monitoring every single footprint around the missile battery, determining if the unit is hot, bugging out, or still locking down local supply depots. Then we drop the hammer exactly when the crew is caught completely out of position and cannot reposition. Once that Panzer takes a direct hit, the tactical fallout is massive. The entire rear guard collapses. Supply routes, ammo dumps, logistics convoys, and any remaining armor under that umbrella are suddenly completely exposed to open airspace above. Infantry pushed into the vector and got decimated before forming up. Survivors broke for cover, only to get shredded again when rapid response units arrived. Heavy radar and artillery could not escape the blast radius, even when they scrambled for hard cover. This proves why every desperate tactical shift just exposes another vulnerability. Splitting into smaller squads might avoid multi-kills, but they get isolated and picked off fast. Gunning the engines limits exposure time, but it blindly drives those convoys straight into our pre-planned kill zones. Swarming the grid with light transports moves ammo briefly, but it just floods zeroed-in supply routes with even more easy targets to hit. The battered force keeps desperately shifting tactics to survive, while whoever owns the sky simply maintains the feed and keeps the kill chain running. This is exactly why the developing situation near Pokrovsk is escalating globally. We are watching modern combat operations brutally peel back these defensive layers until even rear echelon anti-air gets sucked into a relentless loop of detection, pursuit, and total annihilation. And once the perimeter breaks, we are not just asking how a single assault collapses. Let's ask ourselves together, how can any military force keep operating when the entire theater, from the frontline trenches to the deep rear, gets compressed into one massive, inescapable death trap? The most critical intel from this sitrep is that the enemy advance didn't shatter over one burning tank or a single pinned-down squad, but because we severed every single logistical link behind them until their entire offensive crumbled into absolute chaos. The Russian drone network was the first to bleed. Let's break this down. Survivors scrambled for hard cover, but when a supply truck pushed up to regain momentum, that rally point was painted as a target. From there, the strike package pushed deep behind enemy lines. They hunted down radar arrays, concealed artillery, and the very air defenses guarding their rear. That is the real tactical warning here. Out here, combat blunders snowball fast. One minor delay on the supply route instantly paints a bullseye on the entire convoy. A disabled armor unit drags in rescue crews, fresh supplies, and lethal drone swarms. Forcing them to shift positions just creates another kill box. Based on this latest combat intel, Russian assault elements will likely shift to smaller, highly mobile strike teams. Marching heavy, visible columns down the highway is nothing but a death sentence now. The real question is, if adjusting tactics will even matter. Relentless aerial recon and kamikaze drone strikes are suffocating every single troop movement. If you want to track these tactical breakdowns with me, hit the like button, share this intel, and subscribe to Military Force. The entire next phase of this conflict hinges on one brutal reality. Which side can maneuver before the drone optics spot them?